The following interview will be hard to digest. You're going to get a peek in someone's life and their hardship from when they're young, and you'll understand and see how they transform and conquered. So before this starts, I would like to offer a warning. Some of the topics and things that are going to be said will be somewhat disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. And this is Real Talk.
Got married, had kids. I have like a super awesome life now, but I struggle a lot internally, and I don't think I was actually living that life until about 2 years ago. So I'll fast forward to about 8 years ago when I first started having the repressed memories of my dad come up. And that came up during a session with a brand new therapist who basically, I don't know what the heck she was thinking, but we were going through a timeline of my life. And just off the top of her head, she's like, "Do you think your dad ever molested you?" And I like the words were coming out of my mouth of no, when my whole body went, like I almost passed out. And like I was cognizant enough to be able to like sit down in a chair, and then like my mind just went blank, and I went into like this huge like catatonic like brain aneurysm is the best thing I could describe, because I don't think I even knew how to process it. And for like the next 3 years, I felt like I wasn't myself, and I was like completely nuts, went off the rails, ended up at the end of those 3 years basically almost killing myself, to the point that I was in a car about to drive to off or take a highway. And those who know Southern California know that's like a super treacherous highway where lots of people die between Orange County and Riverside County. And I got pulled over by a police officer because I tried to make a U-turn, apparently in an area where you couldn't make a U-turn, but that was, I think, divine intervention. Because I didn't see the no U-turn sign, but I was distraught, so maybe there was. Anyway, they ended up putting me on a hold. Here in California, it's a 5150 or 5250, I think, because it was a 2-week hold. And when I came out of there, once again, I was like, okay, forget that. We're moving on. I was very much of like, I can't do this to myself again. My husband was like, you can't do this to us again. And so I just ignored everything. Well, 2 years ago, I ended up having gastric bypass, because at that point I finally got over 300 pounds, and I was like, whoa, this has to stop. Like I had been overweight since I was like 9, since the thing with the babysitter happened. And I think that was just me trying to protect myself with layers of armor, literally. And also when you're overweight, people don't really see you. Like, I don't know if your listeners out there have experienced this, but when you're overweight, like people kind of ignore you. If you're on a crowd or whatever, it might be hurtful, but like for me, it was almost like a safety thing. Like people would just ignore me. I could be here and it'd be okay. But once I lost all that weight, like I was super happy. And then my kids went back to school, and I started taking them to drop off and pick up. And the school that they were at that point was a very close-knit Catholic school, and where like all the families knew each other basically. And so we would be walking in and dropping the kids off. Everyone would be like, "Oh my gosh, Veronica, you look so good," and all this stuff, because I lost like 170 pounds. But it should have made me feel really good, because all they were doing was complimenting me, and they weren't like being like sexual or anything inappropriate. They were just saying, "You look really good." And like all of a sudden I started having panic attacks again and couldn't go out in public. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And at that point, I had just started with a new therapist. That came about because I had a breast cancer scare. Totally different story. But long story short on that one is I thought I had breast cancer. They found a lump, went through all this testing. While I was going through all the testing, my friend who's an oncology nurse said, get yourself a therapist, because eventually when this comes back as cancer, you're going to want someone to speak to. And that way it's in line when you finally get your test results. Well, I ended up not having breast cancer, thank goodness. But I did have that therapist. And so at least I had someone to turn to. While we were doing the testing for the breast cancer, they did genetic testing and found out that I was BRCA2 positive, which basically means that you have a very high propensity for breast cancer and ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, lots of those things. Well, I had already had my 3 kids and wasn't planning on having any more. So I ended up having like a complete hysterectomy. I held off on having the mastectomy because I was like, I'm going to lose all this weight. I don't want to like have them removed and reconstructed and end up having to like fix them, because now they're not proportional with my body. And it was a little vanity. I get that. My friend who had breast cancer in the past, it came back, and it came back with full force. And that was why I was like, I gotta have the mastectomy, like regardless of whether I want my boobs or not. Like, this is not okay. I don't want to have that scare. So I ended up having the mastectomy because of COVID. The surgery kept getting pushed back, and finally they were going to do it. Last summer, I went in for the pre-op, and while they were doing the pre-op, she found a mass on my thyroid. And so we're like, okay, hold off on the mastectomy. You have thyroid cancer. And I was like, what? Like, she's like, oh yeah, that's cancer. Like, out of the blue. And I was just sitting there going, like, it was still bouncing around, like the C word, you know, cancer. Like, I'm like, is it at least the good kind of cancer? Because, you know, there's some that are okay. Like, oh yeah, she's like, oh yeah. It's like a 98% like success rate. I'm like, okay, well, they're still at 2%. Like, you know, like maybe, I don't know. I started panicking in my head, and when I was driving home, I called my therapist, and I was like, oh, I left her a message of me going nuts. I went, like, for 2 days, I was just kind of distraught, and I wanted to post it on Facebook, but I didn't want to like make a big deal out of it because I didn't know for sure. And even though that doctor was like, oh yeah, I've done 1,500 of these like biopsies, this is cancer for sure, because I had, you know, like the it was like hypervascular and all these markers that typically in imaging show that it's cancer. And anyway, about 2 days later, I was like, you know what, I need to put this up on Facebook because I need support and I'm freaking out. Like, I need people to tell me it's going to be okay. And so I started off basically saying like, hey guys, like, you know, I grew up overweight my whole life. Because of that, I never had the confidence to go do the things that I wanted, either because I didn't think it was going to work because my body was too big, or because I didn't want to put myself out there because I felt uncomfortable in my own body. And so I'm like, I've always wanted to go skydiving and jet skiing, and I'm not going to do all this stuff. And I came up with all this list. And I was at the end, I was like, oh, by the way, I have cancer, but let's get back to all the fun stuff that we're going to do because I need to start living my life. And I knew that I wanted to make memories with my kids. Like, God forbid, like something happened on the operating table, or it really did come back and it was like really bad cancer. Like, I was like, I'm not going out like that. So I got contacted by a bunch of friends who saw it on Facebook who had jet skis or who had kayaks, or we ended up doing like all this stuff. And I did jump out of an airplane. And I had a really, really good time when we were going in for that operation for the biopsy, because they thought they were going to take out the whole thyroid. But they were going to test it halfway through the operation to make sure that it was actually cancer, probably a good thing. If not, they were just going to take off the half that was overtaken by that nodule. I remember the day before surgery, I was super nervous. And I had previous surgeries before that. So I had my gallbladder out, I had the hysterectomy, I had the gastric bypass, a bunch of other procedures. I was never nervous. Like, it wasn't a big deal to me. I was like, what happens, you know, I'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. And so the night before the surgery, I was so nervous. And I told my husband, like, I don't get why I'm nervous. He's like, because you're finally living your life and you're happy and you have something to live for. And you care if you would live or die. And I'm like, oh my God, that's true. And so I woke up from that surgery and the doctor was like, good news, the frozen section biopsy came back negative. We're still going to do full pathology, but probably not cancer. And I just remember I was still like half out of it. And I looked over at my husband, I'm like, but can we still do like fun stuff? Because like and he's like, yeah, of course. Like, and so that's how my whole life as it is now started. And so even though like that was super uncomfortable and scary, it led me to start living my life and realize that like I was finally in a place where I should have been happy. Like, I remember I got to my goal weight and I looked around like, okay, I'm supposed to be happy now. Like, now what? Like, why am I still not happy? Because my whole life I've been telling myself, you know, when I lose weight, I'm going to go skydiving. When I lose weight, I'm probably going to go shopping and be happy and do all this fun stuff. And then I got there and I was frozen in fear. And so with the cancer scare, it got me to finally like push past that and started doing stuff. I started making videos to keep my family and friends up to date on my health progress. Whether like, because I had a lot of tests between the surgery and when they first said it was cancer. And I have an extremely large extended family. So they'd all be messaging me, asking questions. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to make a video, put it on Facebook. You guys will know what's going on. I started having a lot of fun making the videos, even though like now there was nothing to say. So that's how my personal brand, Veronica Ventures, ended up coming about, was me just going online and sharing fun stuff. And people saw me doing that. They saw like the edits and things like that, started hiring me to help them do things. And then it evolved into like actually consulting them on stuff. And so that's where I got to, you know, being a business consultant, or as my clients like to call me, the professional problem solver, and how I got into content creation, which is why I ended up starting my own podcast, because I love having these wonderful conversations, the Biz Essentials. And that's pretty much led me to where I am now. And so I'm still working on the trauma stuff. Like, as you might have mentioned, it's a lot,
Yeah.
it's big. And I mean, even over the past 2 years of therapy, most of that has been getting me to not panic when we bring up anything that is remotely uncomfortable. Like, I used to like just and freeze, and then we couldn't talk about it because I was frozen, and what are you going to do? And so that was a big portion of it. And then it became me of like, oh yeah, like that happened, but I'm okay now, like forget it. And I gotta admit, I'm still a little bit in that, because I think if I wasn't, like, I wouldn't be able to move on. And so I try to process it when we're therapy and then put it away when we're not, because it's big and I'm still working through it. And so the reason I started doing these types of podcasts and sharing my story is because I want other people to realize that, like, yeah, bad things happen and can't always control that, but you can control, like, moving forward and continuing to try to better your life. And so if you keep moving forward and keep following your passion and your hearts, you kind of get to a place where you're doing something that's fulfilling and fun for you. And it actually creates like this nice little place for other people to be okay being themselves too. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is share my story, make it okay for other people to share theirs, and to know that it's okay. Like, I remember the very first podcast that I did where I shared the story in its entirety. I remember saying, like, thinking, like, should I bring up the whole dad thing? Like, maybe I should just say, like, I was molested when I was 5. Like, maybe that's enough. And because it was embarrassing, and I was like, what are people going to think when I say that? That's like terrible, right? And then I'm like, wait, why am I embarrassed? Like why am I freaking out about this? I have nothing to be ashamed of. Like, it happened to me. It's not who I am. So just that realization in itself was mind-opening. And so I think just showing people that it's okay to like talk about this stuff is the first step in it becoming more mainstream. Not in that it's okay that it happened, but it's okay to talk about, and talking about it and telling your kids about it. Like, this is stuff that happens and it's not okay, and you need to tell us. Like, I think if I had that conversation when I was a kid, you know, like, good touch, bad touch, like, I may have been in the place of going like, wait, this shouldn't be happening, and stop it. But it's so taboo to talk about any kind of that sort of thing, especially that stranger danger isn't always like the worst thing, because a lot of the things that happened to me were by people I knew and knew well. It's about having boundaries and protecting your body and being okay to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. So that's my little soapbox. I'll get off of it now. And if you have any questions, I'm all ears.
Wow is the first word that came to my mind. I loved it. I hate it. And I hate it because it sucks that a lot of people like yourself are going through the same thing. I look at you as a strong woman that has gone through a lot of things. I also look at you as someone that is still processing everything that's happened to you within your life. And I believe the first thing, and I think you're working on it, is accepting that all this stuff has happened to you, especially with those that are close around you, which is, again, it's that I think is one of the first steps of being free. And it's unfortunate. Again, correct me if I'm wrong at any point in time. Again, I look at you as someone that you're, I guess, you're half, like how I'm picturing it. It's like you still have a chain on your arm or your leg, and you're pulling in another direction towards freedom, but you're still holding, like, your past is still holding you back. I say all this because I still feel that even up until now, there's probably a lot of stuff that has happened to you. And again, I'm not a therapist, nor do I claim to be a therapist. I'm just a listener. That you still blame yourself on a lot of things that has happened. I've heard a lot of things that you said, and the fact that you truly feel that you could have done something. And yes, you could have done something. But I think at the same time, you were probably saying, if I do say something, then either A, that person will look at me and think I'm a bad person, or B, you just want to make sure, well, either B, you want to make sure it's over and done with, therefore your life is not in danger, And the C to that is, hey, I just want, I guess it's that people pleaser attitude or mentality as well, in regards to that. So I think it's hard, for a lot of trauma, people that have gone through trauma, to actually understand what trauma is. Because I think that, again, when you go through your dad, you're like, well, this is my dad. Like, what is he doing? Is this how love is supposed to be? Is this showing, like, yeah, kids always say, daddy's little girl, right? And this is your, I guess, probably your point of view at that point in time, is this is how I could be daddy's little girl. And then again, you go through the babysitter, that I wish you punched the babysitter at that point in time. But it could be exactly the same time. It could be the fact that, hey, I should do what the babysitter says because I don't want to get in trouble with my family, with my family members.
And
Again, I'm
actually,
throwing out ideas out there. Again, I could be absolutely wrong. This is a 4-part series, so hit that notification, subscribe, and stay tuned.